My name is Shane Young. I am a PowerApps and Flow MVP, and I've been a SharePoint MVP for about 18,000 years, so I've been around for a while. Or as I like to think of it, I just started when I was 14, right? So I'm only 28 still. That's really the way to think about it. So I work for a company called PowerApps 911. We do PowerApps, Flow, Power BI, those types of fun consulting. And then there is my email address, my Twitter handle, my YouTube address, right? I know a lot of you have kind of mentioned ahead of time. You've watched some of my videos. So that's really the way that I try to drive the community forwards, by creating lots and lots of fun content and videos. I try to be focused on, here's how you do this one thing, so you can just get in there, learn, and go. So that's me. Oh, sorry, the last piece there. So then there's also, at the bottom, the MBAS 2019 link on our site. That's got a link to all the things in here. So if you see URLs, you don't have to write down the URL. You can just jump out there and click on them. So I tried to make that easier, because sometimes I get URL happy. OK, so our agenda for this session is really what I like to think of as just war stories. So I have built, at this point, I would say thousands of apps. I don't know. The official title said hundreds. But between the apps I've built, the apps I've supported, and then answering questions in the community and Twitter, YouTube, all those type of things, I have literally interacted with, at that point, tens of thousands of apps. And so I've just kind of learned a bunch of lessons along the way. So what I wanted to set this session up to be was just here are the things that I want to make sure that you guys know and understand. And I'll be real honest, right? This is a tough one to pull off, because some of this stuff is like really core content, like, yeah, I already knew that, man, you're boring, whatever, right? But if you're new, you're like, oh, that's really helpful. And some of it is super nerdy. And if you're new, you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what he's talking about. But the nerds in the room really want to see that. So it's got a nice little fun mix in there. So don't shoot me along the way if some of it you're like, I'm bored, I already knew that. That's fair. I expect all of you to know some of it. The other thing I want to do real quick, I need two questions out of you guys. How many of you are not IT? You all are my favorites. I am not, I am an IT nerd, but I've always been, it's one of my favorite things about PowerApps is it brings so many non-IT people into the mix. And then how many of you would consider yourselves experts at PowerApps already? All right, we're hiring, so. No, that was inappropriate, but true. OK. So let's jump in here. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about storing images and files. We're going to look at some different mentality things around how to approach app building, because for a lot of us, these are new muscles. Then we're also going to talk about some of the common performance mistakes that I see. And as part of that, we're also going to look at some fiddler traces, right? I can promise you there'll be some super nerdy stuff, so we're going to do some fiddler tracing. For some of you are like, what is fiddler? It's like that musical, right? Anyway, some troubleshooting tips, and then at the end, we're going to talk about a little bit of security stuff. So try and kind of just make sure that I get you guys all on the page that I want you to be, so you can all be awesome app builders. So the first thing that I want to talk about is storing image files. If you'd asked me before I started PowerApps what was one skill set I did not realize I needed to be really good at, it would have been image files. I don't know what it is, but I would say probably half of the apps that I am building today are either using the camera control, storing images, or storing some type of files, right? I've had to get really well versed in how files get processed in and out of PowerApps. So what I want to do is kind of talk to you guys through some of that, so you're kind of thinking about it the right way, because I've bloodied my knuckles and stubbed my toe a whole bunch, and I wanted to save you guys some lessons. And probably the most important one is that very top bullet point. I'm a firm believer that all files that you want to use in your PowerApps, they should be stored in the Azure Blob Storage. Okay? It is not it's not included. It costs a whopping 6 cents per gig per month, but it's one of the Azure services that we use. But there's a couple reasons for that. One is that it is the Azure Blob Storage, so it is optimized for storing files, right? That's its whole purpose in life. Two, it is much faster than any of the other solutions. So one of the things I tried to do in some of my early apps was actually store images in SQL, because you can store it in the binary and image tables inside of SQL. That is a terrible, terrible solution. If you are storing images in SQL today, I promise it is going to bite you in the backside way sooner than you realize. So start figuring out how to get out of that right now. You can look at like storing images into things like SharePoint or CDS, but both of those require you to use the attachment control, and you have to kind of jump through some hoops to get them in there. They're just not elegant solutions. So for most of my file storage needs, we're using the add media control, and then what we're doing is we're then sending those off to Azure Blob Storage. So big fan of that methodology. The other big thing that has come up a lot with my customers is size matters. And so what do I mean by that? So here's 3 pictures of Chewy, all taken in different ways. So the one on the left was using the PowerApps camera control. The one in the middle was done using the upload media add photo control, and then stored off into Azure. And then the third one was a picture taken straight up with the iOS camera app. And roughly, right, especially where you guys are sitting, those pictures, they're basically the same, right? Fat, lazy dog laying on the floor. Well, that's fair, but notice up at the top, right, I went ahead and captured the resolution size that were being produced and the file sizes, because when you go to this next screen where I zoom in the picture, look at the difference between the 3 pictures, right? It's pretty radical, and it's, once again, it's kind of hard for you guys maybe to see, but I mean, it's clear the one on the left is unusable. The one in the middle is meh, and the one on the right is super clear. So the reason I bring this up is because when people tell me now that they need to introduce images into their apps, right? So like I have Timesheet apps where you have to scan, or you have to take a picture of the safety sign-off that you came to in the morning, you know, and say, hey, I'm going to wear my hard hat and that type of stuff. Well, the picture on the left, we can't zoom in on your signature, so what was the point of taking the picture, right? So we had to kind of think through those things. Whereas I have another customer that we're doing kind of like the G&J Pepsi thing. We're doing shelf audits, and so for them, they just need that holistic, you know, yes, this has all been set up, right? That was really it. So they're good with a super low resolution picture. So as you get into images in your apps, make sure that you're having these conversations and understanding what does the output really need to be on the other end. Because the other thing that comes into play, one of my favorite customers is up in British Columbia, Canada, which is basically Siberia, right? Anybody from BC? Yeah. Right, I mean, he's the one that tells me this. You can blame Daryl. Right? Well, so and they're out in the, what do they call it? They don't call it the woods, but out in the middle of nowhere portions. Like where there's literally, like, they have to use 3G internet on their phones sometimes. It's a little shady up where they're at. So I didn't mean to insult you, I'm sorry. But it did. Fair enough. Daryl's the one that said it though. But anyway, so for that case, like we had to go and understand like how do we optimize getting these images that we're taking on the apps up into Azure Blob Storage, and that's where we did a lot of this research and figured out Azure Blob Storage worked best. I also just learned this last week, but inside the PowerApps mobile app, there is actually a control that determines whether or not the whole image gets uploaded or whether or not it updates the image size before it uploads it. This is set to true by default. This really like shook me. Like I had no idea that this was here, because I was grabbing those big files. I was grabbing that 3 meg picture of Chewy, and it was becoming 300K in Azure, and I'm like, what is happening? This setting is what was happening to me. So make sure you understand that. Also, this setting is only in the mobile apps. It is not in the desktop player. It is not in the if you're using the app through the browser. So that's another thing, right? These are little nuggets you need in the back of your brain as you design your solution. How you get and you run that app is going to determine how these behave. So there you go. A whole bunch of nerdy stuff about images, but this is, just like I said, one of those things I had to go and learn that I never imagined I'd have to learn. Okay, so then now back into, oh yeah, go ahead. Yes, so he said, is that client side? Yes, it is client side. It is not app settings. As the maker today, I cannot change what that does. So have I already asked the product team to make it so that I can control it as the maker? Yes, I've already asked the product team for that. But unfortunately today, that little green, right, it's green, that little green checkbox is, or toggle switch is client side, and each one's set individually. So it's really weird. These 2 poles like block my view of the screen. But I want to look at the screen, but I'm not supposed to look at the screen. Whatever. You don't care. Okay. So this is another one in the case of getting you guys to kind of switch your mentality. So for me, right, I'm a consultant. I've been a consultant for as long as I can remember. it's very natural. Everyone is a customer. So when I approach a project, I kind of go in with that mentality. But I'm going to bet that most of you actually are internal, right? You work at a job, right? You work at a big pharmaceutical company. You work, at a manufacturer. You work somewhere. And so you are actually the ones that are in there building and supporting apps that are being used by your coworkers, right? So you're like, oh, well, that's just, Bobby down the hall, or that's just Janie in accounting, right? And so what I really want to do is just instill in you that as you start to do and support and help Power Apps run in your environment, that you've got to change gears a little bit and put in your brain that these aren't your coworkers in these cases, they are your customer. And if you can do that, if you can start to wrap these internal coworkers as customers in your brain, it makes it a lot easier for you when you're trying to think about, how do I deal with them? How do I interact with them? How do I take their input, right? Because when they're your coworker, you're like, whatever, I don't care, I don't like Walt. But when they, I didn't like the guy Walt I worked with, it was fair. But when they are not your coworkers, when they are your customer, you set expectations differently with them, you communicate with them, you take them through the process a little differently. So that's one of the things I try to preach to all of my internal people. And so speaking of the process, a concept that I came up with, and I'm going to challenge all of you to figure out here in just a second which one you are, but when it comes to Power Apps, I look at it, there's 3 different types of Power Apps builders. There's order takers, there's do you want fries with that, and then there is nutritionist. And so let's talk about what that means in my world, because this is what I see as someone, once again, who's done a million of these things. So say you got a Timesheet app. You built it, you developed it, it's been rolled out. And then the owner of the app, right, your customer, remember we're thinking of everybody's customers, your customer comes back to you and says, hey, I want to be able to delete people's time. I want a big fat red delete button on the screen. Okay? So if you're an order taker, you say no problem. You literally run back to your desk. 30 seconds later, you've made them a big delete button for deleting time. Yay, move on, right? You took the order, you did it, you published it, life was grand. That's where a lot of people are, okay? As you get a little more sophisticated, you might find yourself becoming a fries with that. So you might say, hey, instead of the delete button, how about we give you a delete button and we give you the ability to confirm. Did you really mean to press the delete button, right? A little pop-up. So you're taking their bad idea, their bad request, but you're making it a little nicer, right? You're getting them some fries with that. So that's the progression, right? If you're in that state, which I'm guessing most of you probably would find yourself in today, that's good, right? Because you've moved down. But what I really want you guys to do is be a nutritionist. And it's probably easier to think of this as you got to put on your business analyst role hat, right? You got to stop and think about this from the business perspective before you think of the technology perspective, right? I can make a delete button with the best of them. Even me, I made a nice, pretty round red delete button. It's possible. But when my customer, it was actually Daryl, speaking of him, so when Daryl came to me and said, hey, I want a delete button to delete people's time. Now, he's got people working all over BC, putting in their time. He's like, the managers want to be able to delete people's time. I'm like, Daryl, slow your roll, buddy. Slow your roll. Right? Because we can't just go and arbitrarily delete people's time. Right? Some guy or man or woman out in the field put in, I worked 4 hours on this project. They're expecting their paycheck to reflect those 4 hours. And you can't just delete that. So what we had to work through the process with him was, how should we really handle this? Well, in reality, maybe what we want to do is be able to reject time. But when we reject time, we need to have a reason. And we need to notify the user that their time has been rejected and the reason why, right? We needed to build a process around it, because the last thing on earth I wanted was for Daryl to get sued in 6 months because they found out that he just arbitrarily deletes people's time to cut down payroll costs. So we went and we looked at the app, and we had a conversation, right? I was his nutritionist. I told him that the Big Mac was bad for him. He needed to eat a salad. And so the app evolved. He got what he wanted because the real business problem was we don't want to pay that time. We solved that problem, but we do nowhere in our Timesheet app do we have a delete button, right? Even when it gets rejected, we just change the status to rejected and filter it. Behind the scenes, what am I doing? I'm capturing who pressed that button, when they pressed that button, what reasons they did. I'm logging a bunch of data as well, a bunch of good old-fashioned CYA, right? We're all good with CYA. Because I just don't want to get in trouble for arbitrarily blowing things out. So that's the next challenge that I have to all of you. If you're at this conference, right, you are an app maker, you enjoy this, become a nutritionist. Don't just take those silly requests, process those requests, and make sure that they actually work and they fit the business and they're correct. Okay? I know, unsexy, unexciting, super important. I have to yell at my own consultants about this all the time. Okay, so next up on the, I don't want to call basic guidance, but straightforward guidance here, is don't build a monster app. So when I troubleshoot apps for people, it's not unusual for them to be like, hey, here's this app that does 415 things. Great. How many of them does it do well? Roughly 0. Okay. So what we see a lot of times is people get this vision. Okay, I want to have a expense, purchase, order, inventory, asset management tracking app. And it's going to be this big. And they'll say, okay, Shane, so how would I do? And they list off 17 things in a row. I'm like, well, step one is let's pare it down, right? Let's talk about solving one problem at a time and solving the one problem well. So we'll continue to pick on Daryl since he's not here. So his timesheet app, right, it's actually broken up into several different pieces. So for him, we need to have the people out in the field enter time. So we made a nice little mobile app that has just buttons that are like next, next, finish to enter time. No training, no questions, no forks in the road. It is just, what project did you work on? What type of time did you do? What equipment did you use? And how many hours did you work? Boom. So we went and solved the timesheet app of capturing the time is one standalone app. And the way that I like to think about that is you can Hulk smash your way through it, right? You open up the app, add time, Hulk smash. How many hours did you work? 4. Hulk smash, right? What equipment did you use? Hulk smash. You just pound your way through the app. You can't mess it up. So that was stage one for us. So then once we'd captured all of this, and notice that app was 100% optimized for the man or woman in the field. So then stage two, we needed a management app. Well, for that particular app, what did we do? Well, that is going to be some supervisor sitting in a cushy trailer on his PC, right, watching YouTube videos, like funny cat stuff, and then switching over to improving time. So we made that app a desktop app. And so that app, when you open it up, there's no enter time, there's no nothing. There's just, here's the hours that you, Mr. Supervisor, need to approve. Boom, they're right in front of you. Click, 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 done. Once again, no weird forks, no funny conversations, just a straightforward app that is part of this overall solution, but that one is targeted just at the time approver. And then you can repeat the same process for the person that's got to get the time into Dynamics, right? But we took, and instead of one mega app that I couldn't wrap my brain around, we built 3 small apps that all had a very specific target audience, each with its own style, but that was how we were able to make this experience work for them and get the monster app without actually making the monster app. All right, so that was another one that I wanted to hit. What's next? Oh, so look at this cute little video I made. So this is an example of, so hang on one second, it'll start over right here. So this is a timesheet app, right? Enter my time. So then I'm going to go in, when did I work, what project, and so when I choose telephone company, it shows me the things for telephone company. There's, I worked for 2.5, 3, 4 hours. I did 2.5 hours overtime. I hit save. Boom, right? There was no decisions. I only showed them the information they needed. I didn't show them all the company task. You chose your project. I did cascading menus, and we got that in there. So that's the type of stuff that is a super simple version of what you want to do. All right. So another thing that I would like to talk about here is follow the process. And so what I mean by this is when you're going to build a larger app, what I try to instill is I want you to build the app in the process that the users are going to interact with it. Same type of deal, right? When I show some of my requirements, they're always like, oh, I want to build that piece first because it's over here and I'm most interested in this. Or that piece makes more sense to me versus that piece. That's not what you want to do. What I want you to do is I want you to build these apps in the order that they come to you, or the order that they're experienced, right? So for example, the purchase order app. I built the vendor's functionality, Once I had vendors, I built the parts functionality, right? Because the parts needed the vendors to be done to do that. Then once I did that, then I was able to make the purchase order, actual line items. Then I put the approval process. Then I put in the distribution process. I literally build the apps in the order that people are going to flow through, or the information is going to flow through. Because that way I don't ever have to like jump ahead and pre-create and make sure I'm guessing ahead. I'm building things kind of in that just-in-time mentality. I'm getting the pieces in place right when I need them so that it's always kind of top of mind for me. The other big thing about building them in order is that, we're going to see here, I'll just go to the next slide, I think. Yep. So the other big thing about going in order is I show my users, right? I want to interact with them in building the apps, but I don't want you to do it too early. So one of my consultants got bopped on the head. He was about to start a large app with a customer. He's like, oh, well, the kickoff call, I'm going to show them the data tables and help them get me to design the structure. And I'm like, no, you're not, right? Go build some things, right? Users, or customers, right? I don't want you all to think about these people as customers. Your customers can't think about abstract concepts or like, what is this screen going to look like and how's the data going to flow? So what I do is I go and build the first little set of functionality. So then now they can jump in, they can click on it, they can touch it, they can interact with it. Then I can get tangible feedback instead of arbitrary random feedback from people. I also, in doing that type of process, one of the things that I will do, I think it was on here, maybe it's not, but one of the things that I will do is typically the first wave of an app that I build is not connected to the data source at all. So, if I'm building this purchase order app that we were just talking about, the first couple iterations, I'm not saving any of the data. All I've done is put the controls on the screens in the orders that I want them in, so I can say, hey, is this collecting the information? Is this moving the way that you expect? And once I get that buy-in that the app is progressing where they want it, okay, we're happy with the vendors functionality. Now I will save the vendors into a SQL table or in a CDS or somewhere like that, right? But I don't try to hook everything up to being saved in the very beginning, because that just ends up driving me bonkers trying to go back and forth and changing how controls are connected to things. So that's another piece of it. Also, I think if I press the button, yep. No, that's not the one I wanted. But so the other thing that I try to do here is people like to plan, right? I mean, either you're a planner or you're not. I am not a planner. I make things up as I go along, so this works really well for me. How many of you are actually like to have a solid, rigid plan, right? You're a structured person. It's fair, right? Half the world's that way. It's okay. What I can tell you from doing these again is that no plan of this stuff has ever survived first contact, right? So, for example, Daryl's timesheet. It's Daryl Day, and it's all your fault. I'm telling him. But so, in Daryl's timesheet app, he gave me a OneNote that was about this big that had every screen laid out that he wanted, the fields he wanted, right? He he spent a week designing everything on this mock-up. How close do you think his app actually looks like to that? Right? We collect time. I mean, I guess he got that part right. But other than that, it didn't really survive. So while my planners, I love you, and I want you to be planners, when you come to PowerApps, you have to accept it's going to change early and it's going to change often. So don't get too hung up on data models and screen flows and things like that. Have a vision, have a plan where you want to go and how you want to get there, but accept as soon as you show it to your customer, they're going to be like, oh, I didn't know you could add a camera control, or why can't that drop down, filter the data backwards and in reverse? Well, it can. It's just going to take me a week to do. So just accept that. And so then, this is Scuba, one of our consultants. He said, protect the user. So this is another one of those things that we talk about when we build these apps. Protect the user. And what do we mean by protect the user? That is things like confirmation buttons, making sure that they can't make a bunch of changes and hit the back button and lose them, right? So trying to understand how your users are going to use the app and making sure that you've accounted for that so they can't create a bunch of data and lose the data, or they can't accidentally click the delete button and delete everything on the screen, right? So try and protect your users is what Scuba there wanted you to know. All right, so I think we did a lot of this. Yeah, I think I covered all that. The only piece we didn't cover here is the light branding. So this is another one of those places, right? A lot of you have seen my YouTube videos. I make really ugly apps, right? It's just kind of my trademark at this point. I make ugly. I think it's so pretty, I feel like I need to, anyway, so I build these ugly apps. But so one of the things that I want to make sure that you guys are doing when you're thinking about your apps is that there should be some branding, right? I like company logos. I like company colors. I like some accents that kind of make it feel like it. But I can't do justice for how many apps I've helped with where they showed me the app and it was gorgeous, right? It was sparkly and all the screens were flowy and it was trendy and not a damn thing worked. Okay? Make the app work and then go back in and put the lipstick on it, okay? That I can't do justice for, there's no point in showing off all your design skills if the app doesn't do anything. So get your app working, then make it pretty. And then for those of you that are corporate people, right, the good news is then you can copy and paste and reuse that stuff over and over again. So kind of once you get a design, you'll be able to use it over and over again. But basically when I look at branding, it is a company logo, and it's the colors that match. That's real close to kind of the way I do it. Some of them like to get fancy. I will get fancy, but I'm not a huge fan. All right, so other build tips. This one, so the top one, this has been a focus of mine for a long, long time. You can't ideate and evaluate at the same time, right? Now we get all psychology on you. But when you're trying to think about what should my app look like, or how should it work, or what control should I use, okay? One of the things that people typically will do is they try to kind of do that ideation process, think about the different ideas, and evaluate them in the same brain cycle, right? Oh, I could add pictures of Chewy. Well, but not everybody loves Chewy. Some people like cats. I don't like cats, right? I can get lost in that. So what you want to do is when you're trying to design and think about these things, is you want to attack it, you want to ideate first. You want to come up with, here's my plan of attack. Here are the things I want to try. Here are the ways that we want this to function. When you're done with that, here's my list of ideas phase, then you can say, all right, brain, flip. And now let your brain go in and start to evaluate, oh, well, the idea of using Chewy is bad because we have a bunch of cat people here. That's okay. But if you're trying to do ideation and evaluation in the same brain thought, it just doesn't work. You get stuck in this endless loop of nothing. So ideate, evaluate in separate pieces. There you go. Psychology 202. But it's just, it sounds weird and dumb, but it helps. Also keep in mind that your POCs, your good old proof of concepts, every single proof of concept ever has become production. So quit naming your first Azure blob storage connection, test Azure, or your database, demo this. 100% of the time, I'm going to find your production app. It's going to be like, oh, Azure test blobs. Yep, that's our production blobs. 100% of the time. One of my biggest customers, their Azure blob storage is called Azure test files. And at this point, it's so intertwined, there's just nothing we can do about it. So don't name your stuff test and demo. If you are going to do the test and demo stuff, hopefully we'll demo some of that at the end. But that's where I like to jump out of the app that I'm in. So, for example, when someone said for the first time, hey, I want to do Google Maps. I want to embed Google Maps into my service tracking app. Cool, yay. I don't try to tackle that in their service tracking app. I jumped over, I started a new app, and I built one app that is just all about trying like 17 different concepts of using Google Apps. I figured it out, I got my Google Map going, and so then I could grab that piece of code and I went and put it into their actual app now that it was done working and all my testing had happened over here. So it has two benefits. One, I don't have a bunch of extra crap in my production app where all the testing happened. But two, now forever and ever and ever, I have a standalone Google Maps app with all that functionality. So in a year from now, when someone asks me about it again, I just open that app up. Hey, look, there's all the stuff I played with last time. So I personally probably have 50 different apps that are just little single concepts like that because that's where I go and go deeper on that concept. I demoed for about half of you earlier the one I built around the AI stuff from this morning. Right? That app will be my AI thinking app for the next, for the next year. It's because that way I know anytime somebody says, hey, I want to do the object detection, I'm going to open that app and be like, oh, there's the code, there's the weird thing I have to do there. got it. And then I can go and jump into their app. So build these little standalone apps. When it comes to formulas, so Microsoft's guidance has always been to rename all your controls, right? I don't remember how many videos they used to put out around, rename every control in your app. Some of my apps have like 700 controls. There's no way in heck I'm going to go rename all those. So the rule that I've personally developed is I only rename the controls that I reference in a formula. So if the label's just a stupid label to show, Shane was here, I don't rename that. But if the text input is the search box that I'm going to use in a search formula, then I rename it. So then that way when I'm looking at the formula, it says, input search box. I'm like, oh, okay, right, dots connected. Also, when I'm scanning through the tree view on the left, I can look at those and say, okay, all the ones that are renamed, I know they're used somewhere else. All the ones that are some weird name, who cares? They're just little standalone entities. So little patterns like that help you be better at this later, right? And help you revisit your own code. So, and the next slide's actually going to show some of that. And I think up here, so there's Daniel Christian. Right, he's another PowerApps MVP and one of our consultants. And so he does, he's a big fan of planning. He's the planner, unlike me, right? So he likes to sketch out the whole app on a napkin. I've never been a fan of that method, but if he wanted to share the tip, I shared. Make fun of him, tell him he's dumb. Did I say that out loud? Oh, sorry. Oh, there he is. I literally hadn't seen you in here. Oops. Next thing you're going to tell me Daryl's in here somewhere. Daryl, you're not in here, are you? Is there anybody named Daryl? Nobody would raise their hand to that. That'd be awkward. Okay. So this right here, I thought this was another one of those valuable things I could share with you. So this is what I call my personal naming cheat sheet. So this is how I do things like name my variables. So all my variables start with var. Because when I encounter something in the list, I know that all my, if it starts with var, it's a variable. All my collections start with collect. Combo boxes are CB and dropdown, right? It's all up here for you to steal. But the reason that I do this, right, I'm not telling you guys to do it this way, though it'd be a really good idea. What I'm really trying to tell you is you should have your own naming style. Because what this really helps is things like the stuff over on the right. I know in every single app that I've built that if there is a var record, that is the entire record's information stored, right? I use that same name over and over and over again, so it's always just var record.id. There it is. Var user, every app of mine on the onStart has var user equals user parenthesis, right? I'm storing that user function's output into a variable. So in all of my apps, it is var user. And a lot of times when people talk to you about this, they're always like, hey, do this so it makes it easier for the next guy, right? Or what if you get hit by a bus? Or what if you win the lottery? You don't care, right? If you get hit by the bus, you don't care if your app's hard to manage or not. So what I like to think of this as is help out future you, okay? Future you is going to have to work on this app. Future you care about. So making it easier on future you is going to cut down on your pain and suffering later. So then down there at the bottom right, Microsoft has a PowerApps naming paper. It's a good read. Don't take it as gospel. How about that? Okay? You should read it. You should consume the information. You should evaluate what portions of it apply to you and which ones don't. So I guess that would be the way I would think about it, right? There's really good stuff in there, but I don't want you to be like, oh my God, we've got to redo all of our apps to meet this paper. That is not the intention of the paper. The intention of the paper was to get you thinking about how you name controls, how you name variables, how you do different design patterns. Okay? So give that one a read. And then just come back and use my slide, my methodology. All right, last slide of build tips, and then we'll get into more nerdy stuff again. So don't do too much on one screen. And so this is one that can get you in trouble for the user experience, but it can also get you in trouble for the maker. And right, we decided we all care about ourselves more than we care about the user, so that's okay. But so one of my apps, it's almost production. I might show it to you in a minute. We'll see how much time we got. But so one of my apps, in that app, we kind of designed this experience around, we were replacing a spreadsheet. And so as part of replacing that, like it was like, all right, we need to capture all this information. here it all is, right? Once again, they had a plan. This is what we're going to do. And so I built out this one screen to be all these things. Like, okay, that's overwhelming. I was like, I agree. So then what we did was they were like, hey, let's try out tabs. Let's have tabs to kind of flip through this. I'm like, oh, that sounds like fun. So I came up with this tab methodology so you could have the same data on the screen, but only show like the different tabs to make the experience go a little better for the user, right? Less overwhelming. It works, but what happened was I ended up with over 150 controls on that one screen. So when I opened up PowerApps and I was working on the app to like edit it and change it, it ran really, really slow. Because poor PowerApps was trying to like type ahead for 150 controls, and it was trying to understand and juggle all those pieces. So I ended up making a really bad experience for me. So you know what I did? I said, you know what? We're going to turn these 4 tabs into 4 screens that look like tabs. So the user experience didn't change at all, but going from one screen with the information shown and hidden to 4 screens made my life as the builder and the maker a lot better. So those are the type of things I want you to watch out for when you start building larger apps with more moving pieces, is that you can overwhelm the user by asking them to do too much on the screen. You can overwhelm yourself as the builder by putting too many controls and things like that in place. Okay? So that's an important one to me. Another one, once again, code comments for future you. Right? You want to help you. It's a natural reaction. So put in code comments. There's a couple of different ways that I like to do this. So end-of-line comments, I will use those like when I'm trying to break up formulas into sections. One of my customers has a timesheet app. It is not Daryl this time. She's like, I hate this guy. It's okay. One of my customers has a timesheet app, and when we enter time in there, basically we follow a really complicated set of rules to determine whether it is straight time, overtime, or double time based on the number of hours you've worked in the week, the number of hours you've worked in the day, and the type of day it is. I'm kind of embarrassed to say it, but I'm going to tell you. When I press that button, it is a 13-page if statement. It's a bunch of if statements, right? But it's 13 pages of ifs that we have to process through to do all the logic to categorize individual's time. 13 pages. So in that particular 13 pages, I've kind of got everything broken up into chunks, and so I use these end-of-line comments to be like, hey, this section is for if it's just regular time. This one's if it's a holiday. This one's if, they've worked 13 and a half hours today and they've violated some OSHA regulation, right? But all of those little sections that I had to figure out, I labeled all of them. So future me, right, when Barry says, hey, Shane, I want to make a tweak to that, future me doesn't have to relearn 13 pages. I find the one section around holiday pay, and then it's just in there. So that's how I use end-of-line comments. Block comments, and you guys are familiar with these, right? They're demoed on the screen, so I don't feel bad. Anyway, so block comments, that's when I want to take and block out a section of code. So as one of my students one time said, oh, so when the user says, I want to get rid of that functionality, and then a week later they call you back and say JK? And I was like, what does that mean? And I had to take my old man hat off and be like, JK, joke. Ah, yes. It was a really sad moment for me. Just kidding. See, I got it wrong. In my head, JK means joke. And I have the mic, so JK officially means joke. Any Cougar Town fans? Change approved. No? None of you. Fine. Did I mention I don't like any of you? Okay, so with block comments, that's a really great way to be like, all right, I'm going to take out this email processing section, or I'm going to take out, this one little chunk, and then be able to put it back in easily. The documentation screen, remember in PowerApps, when you make a PowerApps screen, the only way a user can get to it is if either they're in the Maker portal or you give them a button to access it, right? There's no magical backdoor to it. So in my apps, I like to have a documentation screen. And on the documentation screen, it's just one big label where I just type notes to future me. Shane, yes, you're still good looking. Yes, you're really funny. And then after I get done with all that, I have a macro for that part. After I get done with that, what will happen is I'll leave myself things like, oh, we're not using Azure Blob Storage here because the CIO hates it. Don't ever bring it up again. Or, version 1.4 is in this ugly turquoise color because the new CMO demanded it, right? But so I leave myself notes in there that are like app holistic, that are really important as a consultant to be able to come back in and have some context and be like, why did I do this stupid thing? Oh, I did the stupid thing because I was forced to, right? So I give myself context. What I would like to do that I don't do, maybe you guys can do it for me, I would love to make it, I always make my apps like versions, right? 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and I usually put like a little V in the bottom right-hand corner of the page so I know what version the app is. But what I would love to start doing, so maybe one of you will remind me to do it, is to actually keep a change log and be like, oh, version 1.4 was to sort out this problem. Version 1.5 introduced a combo box because they wanted to search now, right? I would love if I did that. I don't do that yet. So, and then the last little bullet point down there, don't use common or reserved names. This is a big mistake a lot of people make. So when you're making your data source, whether it's SharePoint or SQL or CDS, you like to use column names like date. PowerApps has like 17 functions that have the word date in them, right? So for the rest of your life, when you're trying to find that field or that column, be like, which one of these dates is it? Or status. But if you did project date, project status, that little change in your data structure just makes managing and working with your own app a lot easier. So I try to avoid any word that is a common word. So date, status, amount, user. One customer, this guy, it's a construction services app, and so I was kind of just helping him ad hoc troubleshoot some things. Every single thing in this entire data structure is starts with project. For the life of me, to this day, still cannot. I just have to go in and baby step it, right? Because it's just project everything. And so doing little simple things like that seemed like a good idea, but it made it really hard to build the app and the formulas because type ahead is now worthless because you want project blah, 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 and you might have to type for an hour and a half to get to it. So, Daniel, you cameo again. So Daniel says don't automate everything. So what Daniel wants to make sure, Daniel's a much more methodical person than I am. And I can talk about him because he doesn't have a mic and I can. But Daniel's a much more methodical person. So for example, I'm a big fan of automation. And I like to see if it's an approval process and there's scenarios where I can just auto-approve it. I love to just have that stuff power right through the system, right? Daniel likes human touch. He's like, we could automate this. But wouldn't it be really good if before we deleted 400 users out of AD that a human had to say, do I really want to delete 400 users out of AD? He might have a point. I'm not going to admit to that. But so Daniel's advice to you is just because you can automate everything, maybe you shouldn't always do that. So he also wants you to remember to save early, save often. So Nicola, on the other hand, you can't read that, can you? What she wants to remind you when it comes to automation is don't do it too early. So she's probably the closest thing to a BA that we have on the team. That's really hard to read. I apologize. The Silver Fox people should have fixed that. Anyway, she wants you guys to make sure that you're not trying to automate a process before it's ready to be automated. So you can't just jump in and say, hey, we're going to make an automated solution today, but we don't really have a structured process yet. Right? And we're going to automate, because then what you end up doing is changing the automation 17 times as you develop a structured process. So don't try to automate an unstructured process until you've made it structured. Seemed like a reasonable piece of advice. And this comes from the fact that a lot of times, a lot of early Power Apps are things like paper. Right? We're replacing a paper process. And it turns out that our process used to be, it's an expense report and it's got a bar tab associated. Well, if it's Wes, we're going to reject that every time. But if it is Sanford, if it's Sanford, we're always going to accept it, right? Because in reality, we don't have a true process. We just do it on whether or not we like the person. So that becomes really hard to automate. So don't try to automate that until you work out the kinks and find a way just to fire Wes. Knowing me and sitting in the front row is just a bad combination. I think Wes knew what he was in for, though. So experimental versus preview features. You guys have got to wrap your heads around these. I know a lot of people I talk to just say, I'm not worried about those. I'm going to ignore them. That should not be the case. Okay? Remember, if a feature is marked as preview, then it is coming soon. Right? It is going to show up in your app in production. And most preview features are turned on by default. So preview features, they are imminent. You got to love, know, understand those, or start filing, support issues with Microsoft if they break something for you. Experimental features, they're the other way. And what's interesting that we sometimes forget about with experimental features is it might be a new feature that's kind of on the rise, right? Like they're trying out some new stuff and they're going to make this new functionality available. Sometimes, though, experimental features are features that are on the way out also. So, for example, the barcode scanner, right? So if you rewind about 9 months ago, they put an experimental version in there that was this new capability instead of using the old picture control they had. And so it was experimental, and I actually rolled it out in production. Oops. And when they went from experimental to production with that feature, they changed it, broke all my apps. It was a very bad day. But, right, so that was it going up. But as soon as they put it into production, they took the old version of the barcode scanner and put it in experimental for it to be cycled out of the product. So don't always necessarily think just because it's an experimental that it's up and coming. It could be something they're trying to weed out of the product. So understand them, but there are some really great useful features in there. So I want to make sure that you're thinking about them and using them where they make sense. So I use, components is another example. How many of you have tried out components? Anybody got it in a production app? There you go. I do. I mean, because when I looked at it, I said, all right, I'm going to do a real simple use case. But what I want to do is I want to make myself understand how this is going to play out. And if it blows up, then I'll deal with it. But it's worth it for me to go ahead and embrace it. So from a troubleshooting point of view, right, we're rolling right along. We're doing good. Oh, you go a little faster. But so from a troubleshooting point of view, there's an experimental feature called Enable Formula Bar Result View. I would recommend that one because what you do when you turn that one on is then now you can preview objects and see like how formulas evaluate. And probably the most interesting piece of it is you can see the type of variable, like the type of object, so whether it's producing a table or a record or a string or a date. That's really helpful information. I will also tell you that the last bullet point down there, I think that's an important one. PowerApps Studio sometimes gets grumpy. I don't know how to put it. I reboot PowerApps Studio sometimes. So if you've written a bunch of formulas and they're not working and you're like, man, I am positive these are correct, don't be afraid to hit save, close, and then open it back up. At least once a day, I do something that makes Studio mad, and rebooting it, so to speak, fixes the problem. So that is weird advice, I realize, but rebooting Studio is a good thing. Yes? So you asked, do I build most of my apps on the desktop app or online? The desktop app is technically deprecated, so I build 100% online. And if you ask what browser, I would have to say Chrome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. All right, so that's troubleshooting. So let's talk about performance for a second. So here's a couple of common advice pieces. So the first one there, make sure you think about the internet connection speed of your users. A lot of times we forget that we're building things on super PCs, and then they're like, why doesn't it work on the mobile app and the 3G connection? So make sure you're testing in those. Quit calling users so much. That user function, we use it all the time to get people's email addresses and names. It's expensive. It's not super expensive, but it takes extra calls. And it's not going to change. So when the app on starts, I just store that in a variable, and I use var user for my entire app. And it's just that much less internet traffic that my app is generating. It's little things like that that help. The third one, this is super important. Don't do lookups inside of a gallery. Right? So galleries, right, shows us all the records. But sometimes people go into that gallery and write a lookup function or some other type of call to go and augment the data, right? So maybe it's a list of employees, and they have a second function in there to go get the employee's manager. Okay? The reason that I'm so adamant against that is with the gallery, when you load it, how many calls to SQL or to your data source does it make? Nope, just one. It goes and gets all the data for your gallery in one call. If you have 100 lines in your gallery and you do a lookup inside there, how many connections does it make then? 100 or 101, right? One to get the whole data, and then each lookup is individual. So now you've generated 101 traffic, or 101 calls to the data source. I have seen people destroy and melt their apps by doing this. So we're going to look at that demo in just a second. And then finally at the bottom, the refresh function, there is literally almost no reason to ever use that function. So if you're using that all the time, you're probably doing it wrong. I don't know how to say it. It's just not necessary. PowerApps typically knows. There's a few edge cases, but if refresh is a common function you use, revisit your code. OK, and Daniel wants you to know that concurrent, you're in here a lot, dude. Daniel wants you to know that the concurrent function, which allows you to run multiple data connections at the same time, can get overloaded. So 2 or 3 concurrents are fine. 27 concurrents will probably end up being worse performance than doing them as several groups of 3 or something. So, OK, all right. So here, real quick, is the funness, right? Yeah, we got to go fast. OK, so this is a video that I threw together. So here's a gallery that I built. Right, it's using a list called Giant. And it's just a traditional this item, right? So just pulling in some data. And so even though it's pulling in 500 records at a time, the gallery only loads the first 100. It's kind of a cool trick. So then here is my friend Fiddler. And what I wanted you guys to see here, so when we refresh this, you're going to see that we're going to get about 100 data queries, right? Because Fiddler is showing me all the web traffic between my machine and PowerApps. And that's because it's loading the whole portal. It's loading all that fun data. But what I really wanted you guys to see is I'm going to highlight all of this, I think. I'm going to go straight to the one I wanted to. Nope. Come on, Shane, get there. So here are the statistics. This is a way to look at how big the query is, like if you're trying to analyze how much demand you're going to put on your mobile phones, how many queries it made, how long it took. So it took 8 seconds to load all of that data, which refreshing the portal was a good little time. So then now I'm going to jump down here in just a moment to the 40,959 line right there. And so what I want you to see here is you can turn on inspectors. And in the JSON, you can actually see up in the top, scroll back up, Shane. You're about to. There you go. So up there, you can actually see the query it made to get the data. And if you look in there, you can see that it got the top 500 items because of the, what do you call that limit? Delegation limit. But I want you to see, you can actually go in here and see the raw JSON that it's returning for every single item in your query. So this is a great way to go and analyze the data if you're trying to understand your data structure, or you just want to kind of understand what's happening. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see that the 500th record is down there. All right, so, and the reason it's 501 is because I deleted the 1 record, so I started at 2. But so that is just a way to look at, be able to go in and use this cool tool. It's free. It's called Fiddler, to go and query your data and pull it in. I also want you to know that, see the 100 over there? So the gallery, even though it fetched 500, to minimize the client load, the gallery is only going to show the first 100. But if you scroll to the bottom, it'll actually show 200, and then 300, et cetera, et cetera. OK? So that's the first one. That's a typical pattern. That's a good pattern, right? We made one big call, got all the data, life is grand. So this one, I added a lookup to a different table in there. So now I'm going to pull the data from this other table, and I'm just going to do a simple lookup function to go fetch where the IDs match, so that way I can get the item number for each one of these things, the key field. And because what I want you to see here, if I ever get there, is I want you to see how this is going to change things on the data side. So we do a refresh, and so now we're going to go, right, the answer marching, that's what Microsoft calls the little dots that are going across the top. It is still going, don't worry. But look at how many requests we've already made. And that's the request is right down there, right above the Chrome thing. Right? We're at 230, 236, 237 requests to get that page loaded. And in here, you would see, we're going to see that same 40,000 requests, right? Which is to go get the whole gallery, because we made that one call. But then there is 100 individual calls for all of those lookups in our gallery, right? Line by line by line by line, and that's what took so long, and that's what people end up doing to their apps to cause things to catch on fire. So here I'm just going to kind of click on one of those. So you can see it's an individual request that just got those fields. And then I click on a couple more here. But so this is an important mentality to have, right? I don't expect all of you to jump in and use Fiddler, but this is just a kind of reinforcement that, well, A, Fiddler is great at this type of debugging if you need, But B, I want you to understand the bad things that you can do to your apps. And it was a simple little lookup that you're like, oh, that's no big deal. Why does that one formula destroy it? Well, because that one formula got ran 100 times. So, and here in one more second, I'm going to show you the timeline. This is weird. It's the first time I've ever recorded myself and then tried to talk to myself recording. It's like, future me does not like what previous me did. All right, we're going to move on. All right, so we're going to skip this one because we're running out of time here. All right, so loading screens. So this is a great example of a loading screen. I went out to loading.io and got a free little loading icon. And so when this screen processes for 3 or 4 seconds, when I press the button, I just have a little spinner that pops up. It's a friendly little reminder to the users that the app hasn't broken or freaked out. They're just seeing the data that they want. So these loading icons, these are great little tools. They're the little touches that make your app feel a lot fancier. And then loading.io, you sign up for a free account. It's a free little thing. You can do your company colors, and they have a whole bunch you can choose from. You don't have to use the whole portfolio. So a lot of times I see people jump in and they want to use Power or they want to use Flow and other types of tools, even though they shouldn't or they don't need it. So don't just necessarily say, oh, I want to do an approval or I want to send an email. It must be Flow. It might need to be Flow. Make sure you just kind of evaluate that individually. Oh, yeah, so Fausto says Flow is a connection. All right, last slide. So security, I just did a video on this Friday. So go grab this video. But in this video, I explained to you the way that your users can work around your app security that you probably didn't realize. And I also explained to you how if you're using SQL as a service, that they can actually probably get into the database directly, which you are not cool with. So there's a lot of really great stuff in there that clearly I didn't have enough time for because it's already time to be done. But at the end of the story is I think everyone's going to need a P2 license. So go. Oh, Jennifer says, yeah, Jennifer's not my user. We don't want her in SQL. So there's me and Chewy. We say thank you. There's the link. You can contact me, but I'll be around for a few minutes if I can help anybody. So thanks, guys.